Good day, everybody. Welcome to Friday. We are now actually in our third episode of the calendar year 2026. This is John Morrow. Welcome to Resolve to Live Forward. I'm glad you're here today. If I were to give you an update for those of you that are actually watching this as it streams live, and for those of you that are watching it today on Friday, the I believe this is the 16th day of the month of January. So we're now at the halfway point of the first month of the new year. Those of you that are joining me, you're probably somewhere where the weather is just extraordinarily brutal. And even here in the sunshine state of Florida, Central Florida, where I live, we woke up this morning to low 30s, and some parts of Florida were sub-freezing. And there's more cold weather coming. I've been in Florida since 1975, and I'm going to be honest with you. I don't like cold weather. I came here originally from the greater Chattanooga, Tennessee area. That was where I was born and raised. I went to college in Nashville, Tennessee. I met my wife while I was there. She was actually a native Floridian, and when Donna and I got married, with the exception of the first 1.5 years of our marriage, when I was actually trying my hand at retail management and failing, by the way, miserably. We finally came to Florida at the end of February in 1975, and I've been here ever since. And this has become my home. And because I've been here ever since, I guess you could say I've become acclimated to this particular part of the country in terms of weather because we are, at least during the summer months, certainly definitely on the subtropical level, but we're not the only place in the country where the temperatures are hot, the humidity is even more oppressive, and frankly, it's just a lot of work to keep comfortable when you're outside and to be able to have the wherewithal to get things done like yard work and outside management and maintenance of your home, and then keeping the home comfortable on the inside. So when cold weather comes, these days it's easy for me to get cold. You may be someplace where it's sub-zero. You've got snow on the ground. It's hard as a rock and you can't get out. Please understand, I don't want to be there. And I know you think, stop your whining. Oh, so glad you could join me. I wanted to just have a few moments of levity, if I could, with you before we begin. What I would call kind of like a deep dive. I'd like to begin starting today on this Friday, and with each subsequent week that I'm able to be here by the grace of God to share with you some things that I've put together with the help of the lessons that I've learned through the resolve mindset. This power word that those of you that have been following me for any length of time know is the power word that was adopted by my wife and I back in 2018. And that power word remains my power word for living. And it has helped to ground me and sustain me and to see me through difficult times, because the grieving process and the sadness that you can never shed yourself of, it's there. And so it's important to have a framework for personal success. And that personal success doesn't have to be making great money or having necessarily the most vibrant of health or the greatest of relationships. There's really, personal success is about living life to the fullest extent at whatever stage of life you're currently in, mindful of the fact that as much as we plan and structure and have an end in mind, there's also the process of life's unexpected things, and those continue. These are tools which, if applied, in my personal opinion and from some personal experience, if these are tools that if you apply them intentionally on a day-by-day basis, I believe they can help you with framing a successful day and subsequent successful days, weeks, months, and years if you're granted the light of day to see those. Personal best practices. Now, I want you to think about these statements that I'm about to make and think in terms of the idea that you are in a respond mindset and not a retreat mindset. Let's talk about the word resilience. In Resolve, Resolve, we have a definition, and there are multiple definitions in the word resolve, as most of you know, and if you've read my book, you know it as well. Resolve in this particular situation is one having a definite, firm plan of action. One having a definite, firm plan of action. The letter R, the first letter of resolve, is for the practice of resilience. Resilience is where I respond and I don't retreat. The personal best practices that come with this behavior, as I see them, is that I acknowledge adversity without giving it a permanent place in my life. In other words, I don't allow adversity to take up residence. Now, that's easier said than done. If I could flesh that out for you, let me explain. Those of you that have been following me, you know this information probably to a great degree. However, I hope that there are those of you out there who have recently joined me and maybe are not as familiar. And I hope with time you'll avail yourself of some of the previous podcast episodes and also check out my YouTube channel. My wife, Donna, who I was married to almost 46 years, but was madly in love with for well over 46 years, died suddenly and unexpectedly right in front of me on Sunday morning, June the 2nd, 2019. That left a permanent mark, a very glaring emotional scar on my heart, mind, and my very being. It damaged a lot of people. She was dearly, dearly loved. She was a sister. She was a mother. She was an aunt. She was a daughter-in-law. She was a daughter to, and of course, she was my one and only forever wife. But adversity in that particular case does have a place in my life that I can't avoid. But it does not have to be at the forefront of my thought process. See, this is where we make the mistake of sorry about that, my mistake. This is where we make the mistake of, instead of doing something with sorrow, we let the sorrow make the decision for us. That's giving sorrow a permanent place of residence in our life that will constantly have a profound effect upon everything we do moving forward. And I'm thoroughly convinced that if we let sorrow have that kind of place in our lives, we're giving it control. And I don't think you'll like the outcome. Does that mean that the sorrow disappears because I resisted having permanent place in my life? No, you can't erase what's been done. The damage is there. It won't go away. You might try to medicate it with whatever thing you try to use to medicate yourself for it, but here's the truth. You have to see it, you have to confront it for what it is, and then you have to make a decision. And the decision really comes down to the two simplest common denominators. You either, as they say in the Shawshank Redemption, get busy living, or you just simply get busy dying, or as I like to say, you wait maybe even long for the day that you die because you can't really confront the idea of living life without someone that is incredibly precious and meaningful to you. But I've also wanted to point out, and this is the topic in my TEDx speech that I'll be giving in February. The truth of the matter is, grieving is not just about death. Grieving can be about a divorce, it can be about a loss of a job that you loved. Grieving can be you were a business owner and your business suffered during these difficult financial and economic times and you lost your business. Grieving can be a broken relationship, an estrangement. It can be a betrayal. Grieving also can be tied to an act that was committed against you that damaged you emotionally or physically, an act of abuse. There's so many things that trigger grieving. And I don't want to forget, too, I've grieved so many, many times over watching a beloved pet die and having to even make the choice to put them down because of the suffering that they were experiencing. Don't think for one second that's not heartbreaking. And I think most of you who are watching or listening to this get it. So, one of the best practices in the act of resilience is to acknowledge adversity without giving it a permanent residence. Next, I ask myself this question: what is still possible? And I do that rather than asking the question when a problem arrives, why did this happen and what did I do wrong? Now, let me first of all point out something about what did I do wrong? I'm human. You're human. If you don't accept the fact that because you're human, you're going to make mistakes, and those mistakes have nothing to do with deliberate, intentional behaviors, they have everything to do with just simply making a mistake, not with bad intentions, good intentions the entire time, but it was a wrong choice. That's going to happen. That to this day still happens in my life. Over 75 and a half years I've lived. I haven't got it all figured out, and I'm okay with the idea that I'm still going to fail at times. I'm still going to make the wrong choice. I'm going to forget something that I should have written down and remembered and prioritized. And actually, as I've gotten older, I've realized I need to write myself notes. Now, am I approaching some kind of cognitive brain disorder? No, I'm thankful to report that even though on my mother's side of the family, we were ravaged by Alzheimer's, my mother, her siblings, and a significant number of their offspring, my cousins and their family members, that genetic propensity to contract Alzheimer's with the right set of circumstances and formulary, it has ravaged through that entire family's bloodline. And I've been in a program a few years back when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And through that program, which was sponsored by a couple of prominent major universities who are doing research on Alzheimer's, through testing and other processes, as well as learning how to do hand-eye coordination and mind development and testing processes through gamification online with game boards and stuff of that sort and other types of reading and challenges, it was determined that there's no indication, genetically speaking, of me having that inherited trait. But make no mistake about it, as I grow older, there are certain aspects of my brain function that begin to lag. I won't say they're breaking down. I won't say they're deteriorating. They're just not as acute and astute as they used to be. And so I do make mistakes. And I can say to myself, why did that happen? And I know exactly why it happened. So at least I'm willing to take accountability. But the real question we should be asking ourselves, as far as life is concerned, particularly when an unpleasant adversity comes into our life, is what's still possible? How do you go forward? How do you live forward? That's what this podcast is all about. The next personal best practice, if you want to call it an affirmation, is I practice emotional stamina. I rest when need and I get up when I'm ready. I also practice some form of well-managed schedule for day-to-day living so that there's a certain consistency about what I do and that plays itself out across every aspect of my life: physical, mental, emotional, financial, spiritual, relational, all of those things. And then finally, the personal best practice that I want to conclude with is that I refuse to let a bad moment, and they do happen, to identify me and my future. Think about that for a second. Resilience isn't toughness, it's a continuity. I'm going to say that again. Resilience isn't toughness, it's a continuity. It's a living forward mindset, but you're living forward not randomly. You're living forward through the right choices. Do we get the choices right all the time? No. But if we are persistent, consistent, intentional, and we are always dialed into a process, we will find ourselves experiencing personal success. And when we encounter resistance, we will learn to be patient and not press the issue. We will step back, we'll study, we'll see if there is a different way to go about it, or if there's not a different way to go about it, and it would be better not to press the issue, then back off and move in a different direction. I am thoroughly convinced that there are signs in life that tell us when a door should be pushed and when a door once tried that shows resistance is not worth trying again, because we might regret what we find on the other side because we pressed the issue. It tends to also bring us to a place where we find ourselves not so much restrained, but we're more thoughtful, pragmatic, and mindful in the choices that we make. But throughout the entire process, and I'm going to read this again because I prepared notes on this. Let me repeat. In personal best practices where you respond but you don't retreat, when it comes to the word resilience, you acknowledge adversity without letting it take up permanent residence. You ask the question, what is possible, before asking the question, why did it happen? You practice emotional stamina. You rest when needed and rise when you're ready. And last but not least, you refuse to let one bad moment define or identify your life and your future as you go forward. It's resilience. It's not about toughness. It's about continuity. It's about consistency. It's about always being mindful of making the best possible choice and not rushing the matter. I'm going to wrap up with a brief story about that. And this may not have a direct effect upon resilience, but I think it speaks to the idea of the best practice of resilience is continuity. For 17 years, my wife and I worked for an insurance company. That's right. The company actually hired both of us. We worked in the insurance company in insurance automobile accident claims. She was in the liability area of claims adjusting, which is really much more of a legally charged area. Whereas I was in the personal injury aspect. We have a personal insurance coverage here in the state of Florida that's mandatory on all of our automobile policies. My goal, of course, and my job was to serve the needs of policyholders who had been hurt in automobile accidents. And that's a very broad, and I'm not going to go into the details about it. What I say that for this reason, since we were traveling to work every day, the same basic route, and actually we did that for 17 years while working for this company. When you travel every day and you work for an automobile insurance company, and your area of specialty is, of course, automobile accidents and understanding the mechanics of injuries, and in my wife's case, also the mechanics of damages to the automobiles and how that has to be handled and how that has to be repaired and fixed or replaced, and how that mechanic of damage also impacts the mechanics of injuries to the occupants in cars. But the principal point was we're driving to work every day, same route, and it's a general route. And we're fortunate that during the course of those 17 years, never once did we have an automobile accident. But if I told you that we didn't see automobile accidents en route to work every day, to work, and then coming back from work, I would be lying. We didn't see a lot, but we saw enough to realize some things. And that, coupled with the fact that we also were very much involved in understanding automobile accidents and the mechanism of those accidents as to the injuries that they caused, we came up with three things that we felt represented the three most powerful forces that cause severe, even fatal accidents. And those three things are simply these. Number one, excess speed, speeding. Tied to speed is impatience. People are in a hurry. They don't give speed limits a thought. And frankly, they don't pay a whole lot of attention to the people around them in their vehicles and how their actions, the people in other cars, as well as the action of the individual driving, can have a possible adverse effect and set off a chain of events that leads to a automobile accident, even a tragic automobile accident. And then the third thing, and this became more prevalent as we got later in our years working for the company, is distraction. Now, distraction's always been a part of driving. There are things that we look away and we fail to keep our eyes on what we need to do. But now, with the advent of smartphone technology constantly being at our fingertips, we tend to sometimes look at those instead of paying attention. So my wife and I realized that the three things that are the most obvious causes of severe, even fatal accidents are speed, impatience, and distraction. Now think about that for just a second. In a life of continuity, resilience requires that we are in a process that we adhere to with intentional devotion. And we do not allow ourselves to become impatient and distracted by the circumstances and events around us and lose our focus at the direction we're going. This is not about toughness. This is not about being time bound, although we do run late for things. This is about understanding that we need to take things in a measured manner. And when adversity comes into our life, minimize the reactive mindset. Again, minimize, discourage the reactive mindset. Being proactive doesn't mean you just push forward. You push forward while being incredibly thoughtful. You push forward in a positive direction, proactively, with a positive mindset. So, when thinking about the first letter of the word resolve and resilience in your life, let resilience be that thing that actually stabilizes you. And it allows you to also assess when something difficult is taking place in such a way that you allow yourself to watch it play out while stepping back in your mind and looking at it from a bigger picture perspective and making good choices. And I have to preach that self. I have to preach that to myself every day. Goodness gracious. It's so much fun being with you and talking to you, and I'm glad you joined me, and I hope you'll send me your feedback. You can opine on the YouTube version of this particular podcast if you so desire. I look forward to it. I'd like to hope that you would like and subscribe to the channel and follow me as I'm now uploading these episodes to YouTube. And of course, I use a podcast hosting site called Buzzsprout, and this podcast goes out on multiple podcast platforms, including Spotify and the iTunes Store or Apple Store, if you want to call it that. Finally, I do, and I'm not the least bit hesitant to put my email out there for you if you would like to communicate with me. I would hope that you wouldn't be ugly with me, but that we could at least connect. But my Gmail for this particular podcast is johnmorrowcoaching@gmail.com. johnmorrowcoaching@gmail.com. And of course, you're listening to Resolve to Live Forward, the podcast. I'm John Morrow. It's been great being with you here on this Friday, and I look forward to being with you again in the subsequent weeks by the grace of God. So until we get together again at this time next week and we continue this conversation, this personal analysis, and this self-development process, just let me say this as I always like to say in closing. Please, please remember, don't be reactive. Resolve always, each and every day, to live forward.